talk now about self-compassion specifically, and this you'll see different programs on the platform that involve self-compassion. But to me, if we can work on our own self-compassion, this is the doorway to expanding compassion in the workplace, expanding it toward our patients, our clients that we serve, and it enhances resilience, like Siobhan was talking about earlier. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this today, and then do a practice that I really appreciate, that I hope that you all will too, in terms of self-compassion. So like self-care, I guess any word that starts with self kind of gives this sense that it's selfish. And so self-compassion sometimes has the feeling of like it's very self-involved. If I'm giving myself self-compassion, I'm letting myself off the hook. I'm, narcissistic. I'm only thinking about me. And I'll hear from clients that I work with, they'll say, clients that are having a hard time, they'll say, well, people have it so much worse than me, so I don't really feel like I deserve self-compassion, right? And those of you who are working in healthcare, this group here, we might think, oh my gosh, my patients have it so much worse. So it feels like we don't deserve it if we are in a better situation. It's really the opposite, though. When we are in helping professions, when we have the ability to touch other people's lives, we actually need to do it for ourselves. It's critical, and I'll talk about why in a moment. So 3 parts of self-compassion. The first is mindfulness. So mindfulness is like the general platform, right? Now, why is mindfulness important for self-compassion? How do they relate? Well, first of all, if we're not mindful, we're often on autopilot, and we don't even realize the messages we're sending to ourselves. So one of the ways to become more mindful is to notice some of the messages you send to yourself. So one of the things I like to do when I'm working individually with clients, often, I'll catch it when they start talking. They'll say something like, I didn't do a good job with this situation, or I'm so worried I'm going to get fired because, I didn't do a good job, and I can start to hear the negative self-talk. And I'll ask them to pause, and I'll ask them, well, what's the belief underneath that negative thought you just had? And they'll say, I'm not good enough, or I'm a bad parent, or I'm going to get fired, I'm a bad employee. So we often have these underlying negative beliefs, and these beliefs are going on all the time in our system. Siobhan talked about the anatomy of stress and what's happening when we have compassion fatigue and burnout in our system. Each time we have a negative thought toward ourselves, we're creating a stress response in the body. And imagine this is happening all the time if we're not mindful. If we had a little measuring assessment, I wish we did, that you could actually look at all of your negative thoughts that you had at the end of the day towards yourself, you'd be shocked how many times. And I do try to get some of my clients to record them. And, I've had clients after a week, I'll say, try to write down when you have these automatic negative thoughts. Write them down, and then at the end of the week, we'll go over them. And sometimes people do notice pages of them. Often they're like the same 5 or 10 for many of us, right? The same domains. But what we don't realize is the impact that those are having all the time on how we feel, how we see the world, how we see the work we do. And often when someone is really struggling with compassion fatigue, they're burned out, if we were able to peek inside their heads, we'd see that they were having a ton of negative thoughts. And it's not always in conscious awareness. So mindfulness helps us bring it to the surface. Sarah Jane gave us some tools. She asked us to pause and notice what emotions are present, right? Mindfulness of our emotions or our feelings. When we pause and check, we may notice, oh yeah, there is some irritability. When Sarah Jane said that, I was like, oh yeah, I do feel like a little bit, irritable or anxious. You start to notice these things that are happening, but if we don't pause and we don't give ourselves permission, we don't want to look at it. So mindfulness gives us that ability to actually look at things as they are. But if we judge them, if we say, oh, what's wrong with me? Why do I have such negative thoughts? We judge the judging, then we're back in the cycle again. So we need to create a space where we're not judging it. We're just curious, like, oh, wow. These are pretty intense negative thoughts. I wonder what's happening, wonder why. We don't have to figure it out, but we notice. So noticing, naming and noticing, that's the beginning. We name and we notice what's happening right now. When we do that, we often recognize there are unmet needs. Like, for example, if we're feeling like, I'm not good at what I do, I'm struggling on the job, I have a lot of failures, I'm worried I'm going to get fired, right? If we go underneath that, we track, oh yeah, I'm noticing fear here. Oof, this is scary. This is making me feel really anxious. What do I need? And maybe it's, I need more support. I need to talk to my friend. I need a break. I need to learn something new. I need some more training in these areas. I'm really struggling. We start to notice that these needs are normal, basic, and understandable. But if we don't pause long enough to actually assess them, we can't even intervene with ourselves. So mindfulness is this beginning of noticing and naming. The second part is self-kindness. If we talk to ourselves like we would talk to a friend, it would make a huge difference. So can you imagine speaking to your best friend? If your best friend said, I'm really struggling on the job, I'm worried I'm going to get fired, you would probably offer lots of kind things to them. You'd say, oh, I'm so sorry, or, I observed you to be a really good worker. You'd give them reassurance, kindness, gentleness, and support. But what do you say to yourself usually? It's like, yeah, actually, I am really not good at this. And, you reinforce it. So one of the exercises we do when we start to bring self-compassion in is imagine talking to ourselves like we would our friend. There's even exercises where you can, and I will have my clients do this sometimes, write a compassionate letter to themselves, imagining it was a friend. Dear Tracey, you actually are giving it your best. And it can feel silly, but then there's something that settles in the nervous system when we use kind language. Same thing on the job, right? If we are kinder to ourselves, how are we going to be with the people in front of us, right? If we're short with ourselves, if we're irritable with ourselves, if we're judging ourselves harshly, how does that translate in the workplace? Well, we know how it does. We know that we end up being, we can externalize, we're more short with the clients, we're more short with other people. And so often I'm imagining, this is one of my protections, but when someone's short or hostile with me, I'm imagining, oh, they've got a lot of inner turmoil right now. Like they are not feeling great inside. So sometimes that does reflect out. But the opposite is true too. If we're kinder and gentler to ourselves, if we say to ourselves, slow down, I've got time, just kind things we can say, then it can be felt by the person in front of us. There's this great study that happened, I think it was like in 2017, with psychotherapists. They had psychotherapists do a 5-minute meditation practice, including some self-compassion practices in that. And then they asked the clients after the session, how present they felt the therapist was. They didn't know that the therapist was doing the meditation. They had 2 groups, one group that was doing that practice, one group that wasn't. The clients felt better after both sessions, so that would remain the same. But the clients felt that the therapist was much more present in the group that had meditated before, and they didn't know they did. But something settles when we can turn toward ourselves, when we're aware of what's happening, and we're kinder to ourselves. And then the last part is this common humanity, that we're not in it alone. And this is another challenge, is that we only have our lens to look through. And so it's hard to feel like other people are experiencing the same thing. That's why it's so important to get into groups like today. And now, thankfully, we're in person. When you're doing your groups, I highly suggest, as you're going over practices, to share how it is, especially if someone's having a difficult time. I often model for the client. I'll say, oh my gosh, I was really distracted. If we can share that it was a struggle for us, people are more willing and more vulnerable themselves. So if we want to create a compassionate workplace and we want to be able to utilize these tools, we have to be able to be a little bit vulnerable ourselves and say, me too, this is hard for me as well. When we do that, it makes a big difference. And we also feel less alone. When we feel less alone, we actually feel more empowered. we can get stuck in feeling like we're in our own little bubble. And when we do that, it can feel hard to get out of that, right? And we also see someone else as completely not related to us. Like, oh, they have it all together, or they're resilient and I'm not resilient. When we realize the common humanity of like, oh, we're all struggling. Everybody is struggling. There's something that can be validating about that as well. All right, so we talked about this. So well-being, again, we're giving you some of the science pieces around it too, but self-compassion has been linked to feeling better in the body, so physically and emotionally. It also is the platform or the beginning of this compassionate workplace when we can turn it from ourselves out into the world. And so self-compassion can be that foundation. And so I think most of this I covered. Yeah, so speaking the truth, it also gives us the ability to speak the truth because we are no longer just stuck in our own small bubble. So yet again, I love my the pretest. I love my pretest on Kristen Neff's website, selfcompassion.org. She created something called the self-compassion scale. So this always blows healthcare professionals away. Blew me away the first time I did it. So I'm a psychologist and been doing mindfulness. The first time I took the self-compassion scale, I was really low, like startlingly, like embarrassingly low. I was like, ooh. Like I can't remember what the category, like she has, when you score it, you get like your percentile and then what that means. And mine was like, you need more self-compassion, like danger. Like really harsh inner dialogue. And again, without pausing or without an assessment, I would have said, I'm plenty compassionate, but I wasn't actually. And so I encourage you, this is another scale you can just do on your own, but it's short. You can really look at like how compassionate really am I? Do I blame myself for failures? Do I tend to judge myself harshly? And I would suspect the majority of us do to some degree, right? So this is another way to assess before you start doing some self-compassion practices and recognize, and then kindly, oh, wow, like there's a lot of harshness here. So I want to do a practice with you. This is called a self-compassion break. And I really like practices that can be short, in the moment, on the fly, and that nobody will notice, right? So you can be in a room with lots of hostile people and do these practices. You can be in a bathroom stall, you can be in your car, but self-compassion break can be really helpful when you're feeling some of those feelings we talked about earlier, burned out, irritable, judgmental, emotionally just off kilter for the day for whatever reason, whether it's work related or home related. I mean, we're coming in with lots of stuff. So I'm going to do this practice with you if you're willing. I'm going to make it a little bit longer so you can see what it feels like, and then I'm going to show you the short version of it. Okay. So if you're ready, I'm going to invite you to just get comfortable. So just maybe shift in your seat. See if there's anything that would help you even be like 5 or 10% more comfortable as you're sitting. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Some nice movement. And you can keep your eyes open or closed. I'm going to do a little bit of a guided visualization. And if at any point in time when I'm leading doesn't land, then just, permission just to notice that. It's like, okay, this isn't landing. And you can do your breathing practice. You can focus on body sensations. So it's always up to you what you choose to focus on. So as you settle, let's take 2 or 3 breaths. Breathing in, feeling the breath coming in. Breathing out, feeling the breath emptying out. And you might notice where you feel the breath most pleasant right now. So maybe feeling the warm air coming in and out of the nose. Maybe feeling the belly rise and fall. Just paying attention to each breath. When your mind wanders, just gently return it to the next breath. We just begin again. And taking a moment now to scan your body, noticing if there's any areas of the body that are holding tension or gripping or just a little bit of tightness. Perhaps seeing if you can direct the breath to that area of the body. I'm not trying to make pain or injury or fragility go away. We're just noticing and softening if we can. Good. And now I'm going to invite you to think about a situation that has been stressful lately. Maybe something that's been weighing on your mind in some way. Could be a physical health issue, could be work-related, or something with a loved one. Maybe not bringing the most stressful situation in, but something that's had an impact. Maybe even noticing what's been hard about the situation. You might even imagine like you're watching a movie with different scenes that have been difficult. Notice if there's some self-talk or beliefs that are there, judgments about yourself, judgments about another person. And then noticing where you feel the sensations in your body. So often we're feeling in our body anxiety or stress, but we don't always pause. So see if you can pause now and notice, where in my body do I feel this? Perhaps if it's helpful, place a hand on that area. So if your chest is tight, maybe placing your hand on your chest or belly or neck or shoulders. Just like this gentle, warm hand, your own hand. Just feeling the weight and the temperature of your hand supporting you. And then perhaps offering a few words of kindness to yourself, like, oh, this hurts, or this is hard, or I'm sorry that I'm suffering. I care about my own suffering. So just acknowledging with kindness this experience. And then imagining all the people that are struggling with something similar. So if you have a physical ailment, maybe imagining people everywhere across the planet, they may have the same difficulty. If it's a work-related issue, maybe imagining people you know that are also in the same boat. It's like, oh, yeah, you too, us too. Maybe even imagining, just like you sent kindness to yourself, sending kindness to people struggling, just like you. Sending encouragement. And then gently releasing your hand. And then asking yourself, what do I need most right now? Or what is this part of me that feels anxious, worried, fearful? What does it need? We don't always have an answer, but perhaps it's just your attention. Maybe it's more relaxation or more support. And then just gently letting that go, and we'll come back and take a couple of breaths now, just feeling how the practice, the self-compassion break, is experienced now for you. And then taking a deep, full breath in, and gently exhaling, releasing all the way out. Good. And when you're ready, I'm going to invite you to slowly open the eyes and come back. Maybe a little stretch, just to feel a little bit of movement. So I'm curious, what did you notice? If anyone's willing to share. Yeah, Jim.
The place that I had this stress or wherever, like my neck.
Yeah.
And thinking about the self-reflection, the pressure or the stress went away in that spot. I don't know if it was because of what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
Or then when I changed my thought process to, I always have stress in my neck, pain. And I keep thinking it's just a physical thing, but it felt like that went away a little bit.
Yeah. That's so interesting, right? And we don't know. I mean, it could be physical. It's like we don't have to say, "Wow, this mindfulness can cure your neck pain." But something happened, right? Something happened in that process, and often people will say that. And that's one of the things that's really helpful, especially the physical body, when you notice some kind of shift in how you were feeling. Did anyone else notice a difference in tension in the body or sensations? Yeah, you did, Siobhan. What did you? A general state, your body. Yeah. Yeah, so it can be really helpful when we start to pay attention with kindness to something that needs attention. It can make a difference, right? That's that beginning of that self-compassion. Anyone else notice anything? Yeah.
I noticed what I would tell other people, I never tell myself. That's the
Yes.
thing. So that whole thing with imagine somebody in your exact same circumstances, they definitely don't apply those same rules.
Yes.
So,
Yeah. And what did you notice when you did that?
still hard to do.
Still hard to do. So I just want to honor what you're saying, because when they've done research on self-compassion, 80% of us are more compassionate toward other than ourselves, right? So that's such a natural thing that we tend to be able to give it freely, and in return, it's much, much more difficult. In fact, women, the studies are even higher for women, not surprisingly, because it goes out so often. And the good news is we can train ourselves. That doesn't happen. That's a natural proclivity, like you just said, to do it out and not toward ourselves. But we can move toward a more balanced 50-50. We're not trying to get less compassionate toward others, but if we can start to turn it in, we actually even have more compassion, and it reduces compassion fatigue. One of the interesting things about compassion fatigue is the name itself, because truthfully, if we look at what compassion is, which is to feel someone else's suffering, right, and then to activate, to do something to alleviate it. So empathy is to feel how another person is feeling. Compassion has an action component. It's not just feeling how someone else is feeling. It's the strong desire to alleviate someone else's suffering. So how could that actually go away? We're actually wired as humans to have that capacity. But again, what happens is it gets eroded. That capacity lies more dormant when we're burned out, when we're disconnected, when there's been changes in our nervous system, right, over time. So when we can start to replenish that, when we bring self-compassion in, then that natural flowing compassion exists, and we actually have enough. It never runs out. So the truth is, compassion fatigue, is a term, but really it needs to be replenished, right? It needs to be replenished and rejuvenated, because we sometimes lose that connection with ourselves. Anyone have a hard time doing the practice? I love when someone doesn't like a practice. Anyone willing to acknowledge, like, that stinks, I didn't like it at all?
No,
Oh, good, yes.
I wouldn't say that, but for me, and I'm almost certain this is the case, that, as you said, focusing on yourself, which you don't want to do, but in very little time, with very little focus, realizing that pretty much everybody in this room probably has the same worry, the same feeling, the same stress that I'm sitting here thinking about.
Yeah.
I'm certain of that.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking about finances, right? And I know everybody does not.
Yeah. Of course.
Focus on, on what we're going through.
Yeah.
And gratefully, we're a very strong, financially sound system, but it's been a very different couple of years.
Yeah.
And I know the people in this room are all at management level in our company, and they think about it the same. So I think somewhat helps to think that stress is spreading.
Yes.
Everybody's thinking.
It's true. I mean, it could.
Same concern.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that does help because we can see each other as human rather than management and staff or frontline versus, and those divides in systems of healthcare can be so difficult to overcome. But the great equalizer often are practices like this where you realize, of course, as humans, we're suffering with these same things. We're not different from each other. That common humanity component can make a big difference, and for people to recognize, oh yeah, me too. Look, our CEO too, our founder still has these worries, just like I do. There's a compassion meditation program called Just Like Me, and it's this idea, just like me, you also struggle. So that can be very helpful to recognize and see the similarities rather than the differences, right? Anyone have trouble concentrating or feel like it was too stressful to actually even go there? Because sometimes people, Jake, what'd you think?
I got to focus. Busy for me right now. It's like crunch time.
Yeah. Yeah, so when we're distracted, it's like, this seems nice to do, but you know what? I can't do it, right? And so our minds can kind of hijack us and take us away. I like to talk about that honestly, because how many of us feel like Jake? Like, of course, like we're busy, we've got lots of things going on in our minds. So a generous view toward ourselves and other when you do some of these practices, if they don't land right away, or like I said earlier, someone seems disinterested, we have no idea, and we're just going to assume, he might have heard one piece of this, and maybe tomorrow he's going to put his hand on his heart and say, oh yeah, but maybe it isn't right now. So never underestimate the impact it's having. Oh, so this practice you can do on the fly. So this is a practice where very surreptitiously, if you're feeling gripped with judgment, inner or outer, or there's a physical pain, no one has to see. You can just, a little hand here or there, or not even actually having the hand, but imagining. And then just actually going through these three things, noticing what's here right now, how do I feel in my body? And then asking yourself, what do I need in this moment? How can I talk to myself like I talk to my friend? And then imagining other people too. Probably like everyone in this meeting is feeling a little bit of anxiety too. Okay, yeah, we're all in this together. So you can do that on the fly over and over. I had this Monday meeting at my hospital, and there was one woman in particular. She was really difficult. She was really mean, okay? And I had the same meeting with her for like 10 years, like literally, like talk about like, going in, and every week I would dread it. I would be like, ugh. And I was actually kind of irritable because I knew I was going in, and she would just make cutting. She had this cutting little sarcastic way she would say things to me. And I started to do these practices right before the meeting. I'd be like, okay, other people feel like this too. Maybe she's stressed. And so over time, I think I was less reactive. I stopped having a little sour look on my face, which I'm sure I did, or I was less, and I was a little bit more patient when she would say what she said. And something shifted. And so I recognized, like, I can do this when I meet reactive people or situations, I can do this. I can do this with my eyes open and sort of, still in the conversation, but I'm like, okay, this is hard. Okay, this is suffering. Okay, I don't like her. Okay, that's okay. Kind of going through that, but instead of reacting unconsciously and creating more of that split. So these practices can be really helpful for the interpersonal dynamics that happen in complicated systems, right? Where we can learn, we may not like some of the people we're working with, or we might have reactions to them, but we also have this capacity to bring kindness to our reactivity and our own responses. All right, I think, yes, so that was my last slide. So I want to see if there's any questions about anything that I shared today or comments. I'm happy to address that. I'm hoping that, again, as you're thinking about these practices for yourself and for your teams that you're leading, that just having a fun, view of it and being willing to have it go really bad, really wrong, and laugh, because it's not a problem. Yeah.
Here's a question that came to my mind. When you said that about 80% of people are more compassionate to others,
Yeah.
would you say that the 20% who are not, with the same process, because maybe they're more compassionate to themselves than they should be than others, will the same process work in that direction?
Great question. I'd say it's both. There are some people, small subset of people, that don't typically have a lot of compassion for others. A very small subset, we might say, have like psychopathology, that are on the antisocial spectrum. That's very small. And then some people, if they have neurodiversity, maybe they're on the autism spectrum. The compassion out is difficult. So there are some distinct differences, but most people, it's just a matter of training to kind of find that, that it may just be not enough exposure to different groups, right? So it may be more of an insular where people haven't had exposure to, for example, clients with schizophrenia. The first time they work with people with schizophrenia, they're afraid they may have compassion toward their own response, but they feel aversion towards something they don't know. So sometimes it's just exposure and learning. And in healthcare settings, that can take a little bit of time. So usually it's that both groups can do the same thing to land somewhere in the middle. That's a great question. And there are some people that are, need a lot of compassion work because they've had trauma or really adverse experiences early on where it's a lot harder to generate that easily. I want to say one other piece that just brought up something that sometimes when we bring compassion in for people that haven't had a lot of self-compassion, it can create something called backdraft, which means we can actually have like a negative reaction. So when we're kind to ourselves or we're mindful, sometimes we don't like what we see or it was too vulnerable. So you might notice that in staff too. You might notice people might be irritable or they might have a little bit of a reaction. And we're getting into sometimes emotional territory. I mean, you never know where people are coming from or what they might be struggling with. So just, if someone has a strong reaction, it may be because this is the first time in a long time they've softened and given themselves some kindness, and that can feel a little scary or a little foreign in the beginning. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? All right. Well, great. Well, thank you for participating and doing these practices. I'm so excited for you to start, and I'm really excited to have Jen take over and now begin her exploration of the platform with you all.